It seemed strange to him to release all of the prisoners. Yet, the prince had commanded it. It was no place for him to question His Highness. He only worried what would happen when His Majesty the King returned. The prince sat on the Ashwood throne and spoke more clearly and louder than he ever had. "I am releasing all of you into exile," he had said. "Take these flags and put them on the ships we are giving you. If I find any of you on land, you won't be going back to the dungeon. I hope I have made myself clear." That was 4 or 5 days ago. There were more cruel punishments than exile, though. It was a vast improvement from the Underdungeon, for sure. He wasn't sure what the flags were for. There was a fish one, a sheep on another, a badger, 3 lions, and other various things. 7 or 8 flags there were. The trip to Lynn Harbor took 2 days of traveling, and prisoners had been carried in cages drawn by horse. They were good traveling days for the 36 men of the city guard and their 8 horses. The skies were clear, there was no rain, and the sun was bright. So bright that Fari frequently had to tip his hat down to keep it out of his eyes. Every few hours, they would stop to let the prisoners relieve themselves. On the way, a dozen or so had tried to run. The city guard had left them for the crows with arrows in their backs. Now he and his party was making their way across the bridge, the grand structure centuries ago that stretched a mile across the Lynn River to the 7 Holds. It was wide and made of stone, cobbled together with massive boulders and smaller rocks in between. It stood hundreds of feet above the river itself, and where there was land there was a small riverbank that would disappear with a slight rain, and then a steep cliff. The cliff on the eastern side was more densely wooded than Fari had ever seen. There were trees in the west, to be sure, but not this many. The only trees in the west were young ones that had not yet grown, and ancient ones that were deemed sacred. All others were used to build houses and warm hearths. But here you could barely move between them if you weren't on a path or road. That must have helped when it came to building towers and barricades. The standing army was taking territory day by day, long stretches of road. Behind them were carpenters and craftsmen, setting up watchtowers and walls. The city guard came in behind them, occupying the towers and guarding against ruffians, shooting and slashing at any who attacked. And now they awaited their Lord Commander's leadership. The craftsmen had done a fine job. There were towers reaching a dozen yards up, fully manned. It was day, yet many bonfires burned. Some fires were surrounded by cooks roasting vegetables and meats to give the troops and guards, while others were simply pyres. It had only been a week or so since the invasion started, yet the efficiency of the workers made it appear as though it had been occupied for years. It was a very well thought out operation. A man of the guard met and saluted him, one named Bert. He had the pointed helm and mark, and some sort of weapon in his hand. The grin he wore took up half of his red face. "Greetings, Lord Commander. All has been well. Take a look at this thing. A halberd is what they call it." "Strange," said the Lord Commander. "I would call that a bardiche." It was something between a glaive and battle-axe. "It appears Sheriff Howard has everything in order. Would you happen to know where he's at?" "I last saw him in that fortress about a quarter-mile down the road. He's working with Sir Bjorn, I believe." Sir Bjorn was leading the charge, commanding the standing army. A tall and rotund man from what he remembered, Sir Bjorn had preferred to use an axe instead of a sword with his shield. Fari was good with neither sword nor axe, so he let each to his own. He would even let Bert keep that bardiche, or halberd, or whatever it was supposed to be. In truth, he thought it looked nothing like a bird. He walked down a well-worn dirt road, where towers were flying the red and blue wyvern and griffin banners, and fires burned on either side every few dozen yards. There were men and women taking plate and mail off corpses, and others hurling naked bodies onto the pyres. Others were cleaning whatever armor or weapons they could scavenge. Many were traitors, he was sure. But there were so many marks tucked in their trousers, both the blue of the city guard with the shield and tower, and the red of the standing army with their sword and crown. If the Middle Kingdom had lost a single man, Fari wouldn't have been able to tell. The fortress was a wooden castle, with logs linking tightly together. The entrance was a roofed tower that flew the banner of the Middle Kingdom. stationed by 2 of the city guard. They saluted their commander as he walked by. In the courtyard, Sheriff Howard and Sir Bjorn were standing over a table, pointing angrily at something on it. Sheriff Howard was a shorter man with a great broom of a mustache, and had the blue cloak that all sheriffs wore. Fari himself was supposed to wear a red and blue cloak, but he found it was too hot to wear in the summer. Winter was coming, though, so he could probably put it back on. Sir Bjorn had the monstrous red beard he had always remembered, braided and adorned with beads and studs. He did not remember the gray mustache, though he figured age would find everyone, even the mighty. Sir Bjorn shouted over to him in his gruff voice with its southern brogue. "Lord Commander, come join this argument. Sheriff Howard here wants to take prisoners from any who invade the encampments, but I received orders right from His Highness the Prince himself to kill all who fight us. The craftsmen could build prisons, I'm sure, but we need our resources elsewhere. Best not split focus where we need the road we conquer fortified." "No need to worry yourselves with us any farther, sir. We won't be taking any craftsmen from you. It happens I've come with 4 horse-drawn prisons. Each fits 2 dozen, or 3 if you really try. As for the taking of prisoners, the standing army is not required to do such a thing while taking the road. However, His Highness has commanded the city guard to take prisoner any man we can who invades the already taken road." Sir Bjorn harumphed. "That shall have to be good enough for me. I'll be making my way then. I leave the fortress in your command, Lord Commander."
"Very well," said Fari. "Sheriff Howard, inform all of the men to take prisoners, and load them into the prisons I brought. I must say, you have been doing a fine job here. It appears you do not need me for anything. Your leadership has been quite adequate."
"Thank you, my lord. I would attribute our success to His Highness and his planning, as well as the skill of our men. It is a rather stressful situation, though. I must say, so much responsibility has never been required of me."
Sheriff Howard's posture was proper and upright. He was old, older than Fari, and had a great deal of respect and courtesy in his voice that couldn't be found in the younger guards and sheriffs. When he spoke, his mustache would wiggle up and down, and his mouth was entirely hidden. "Even so," said Fari, "you have kept the men in line well. Have there been any invasions thus far?"
"None of note. Any who have tried to attack have been hailed with arrows. You can see the pyres well. They serve as a beacon and warning to any who would dare attack."
The smell coming off the pyres could be sensed from miles away, and it was a horrid stench. It didn't smell unpleasant, but the thought of what it was made Fari sick. He was thankful that he had men to take care of the pyres, so he wouldn't have to go near them.
"We have lost 2 men so far, and they were drunk when they were caught unawares by an assailant. I cannot speak for how many the standing army has lost, though. I imagine it must be more. Yet they appear to be handling things quite effectively. Sir Bjorn's tactics are very effective. If I may ask, do you plan to take the command of this operation?"
Sheriff Howard's voice was earnest, he could tell. By the way he spoke, he could tell he did not enjoy the job. But it didn't matter how much he liked it. What mattered was how good he was at it. "I am afraid I will only stay until the first cart is filled. His Majesty awaits my return in Linwood. I came to ensure everything was being done to standard, and you all have exceeded my expectations. If you wish for some relief, I can have Sheriff Hussack split the duties with you." Sheriff Howard's posture lightened.
"That would be very much appreciated, my lord," he sighed.
Sheriff Ewan Hussack was certainly a competent leader, if not a bit harsh. The day was spent riding down the road with a guard named Keegan, observing the guards and how they were stationed. There was a guard for every 100 yards of the road, and they all seemed fine. They patrolled up and down, some with a loaf of bread to nibble on. He witnessed a man hop the barricade, wildly wielding one of those axes, the halberd, who was met with 10 guards who handily disarmed and bound him. "Very good, men," he said. "Throw him in the cart." It was almost sad how easily this axeman had been defeated, but it was extremely funny. There were about 20 in his cart by the time he came back to the fortress. That night, Fari had taken off his boots and was drinking tea when Bert came in. "Lord Commander, we have another prisoner." "Very good. Put him in the cage." "I think you'll want to see this one." When he came outside, there were 6 men holding ropes that were binding this prisoner who was thrashing about. He had dark hair and eyes, pale skin and a narrow face. "Sir Jacob?" he said, but this man had much longer hair, and didn't have the dark armor that Sir Jacob was known for. There was more emotion on this one's face than he had ever seen from Sir Jacob, and his eyes were wild, where Sir Jacob's were more melancholy. After a second glance he could see the differences, but initially he had looked just like His Majesty's favorite knight. "Wow. Ha! Well then, I must know. Who are you?" "I am Jordan, Knight of Larksvale," he said through his teeth. "I need to get to Mifflin if you would let me pass." "Why did you arrest this man who was simply passing through?" A man of the guard answered. "He started attacking everyone, that's why. He came with around 10 others. My apologies, but we had to kill a few of them. The rest we have loaded into your cart." "You invaders have taken our land," the prisoner named Jordan said. "We will not let you act with impunity." "Ah, Sir Jordan, was it? I am afraid you have it backwards. As I understand it, it is you who shall not act with impunity. Your war has ruined trade in the Middle Kingdom. We are simply restoring order. We do not care if you kill each other, as long as it does not interfere with our affairs." Fari himself barely understood how it all worked, so he had just repeated what he had heard. "We are taking control of this road, so we can have a safe, neutral ground for every merchant from any hold to travel. If you had not attacked us, we would have let you pass." "How could we not attack you? You are invading us." "I thought we just went over this," Fari scoffed. "Throw him in the cage." "Lord Commander," said Bert, "he had this sword." "Throw it with my things. I'll present it to His Majesty or something." Bert's reaction showed that he had hoped Fari would let him keep it. The sword was quite fantastic looking. Welcome to the Storytime Saturday podcast. I'm your host, TGD. This is the second Fari chapter, Lord Commander Fari, and things are going pretty decent for the Middle Kingdom right now. So let's talk about Fari himself now. We get to see him in action more than we did in his first chapter, when he's actually there leading the city guard. I think the best thing about Fari as a character is how detached he is from all the emotional issues the other characters have. So he's really an outsider that we get to see he's really the only outsider we see aside from Sir Jacob. He seems to have a very neutral understanding of everything. He's just driven by duty and nothing else, nothing more. That he's not super emotionally invested like all the other characters are. All of these random knights and stuff, they're really just side characters, throwaway characters. I like this Bert character though. He's got this big smile on his face, and he wants to keep all this cool stuff. So you see him and he has the halberd, and he's like, "Hey, this is awesome." And then when he has Retribution, Jordan's sword, he's like, "He had this sword, Lord Commander." He was hoping that he would get to keep the cool sword. But so I think he's kind of funny. Now, Gerald and Georgine don't appear in this chapter, but we see that their plan is actually working. Their plan to conquer the trade road was actually as convoluted as it was. As convoluted as that plan was, it's shown here that they're actually geniuses. That this is actually working. Their plan worked. Jordan shows up at the end of the chapter, and he's heading headlong into battle against the Middle Kingdom, which is definitely a mistake. He gets his sword taken from him, which I probably planned for him to get back. Maybe, I don't remember. Now, something to note is that Fari and everyone else thinks Jordan looks just like Sir Jacob. In real life, Jacob and Jordan are twins. People will tell you they're identical. You could tell them apart, but they are twins that look very similar. I made them separate characters, like from their brothers. So Brandon, Josh, and Ben are all true brothers, and Jordan and Jacob, like Jacob's completely disconnected from the family for whatever reason. Probably because Jacob and Jordan have dark hair and dark eyes, where the other three brothers have light eyes. So I probably
did it for that reason. I don't actually think I ever decided whether or not Jordan and Jacob were actually twins separated at birth, like this chapter's implying. Like, we've gotten hints of that. We know that Lord Pernton has a history of producing twins, so maybe that happened there, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's just a coincidence. I don't remember what my plan was. Now, at the beginning of the chapter, I want to just point out some of this stuff. Gerald and Georgine have the dumbest plan ever. This is the dumbest, most convoluted thing ever they do with these prisoners. So Gerald and Georgine, I mean not Gerald, Jeffrey. Jeffrey. Did I say Gerald earlier? Yeah, Jeffrey. Oh my goodness. See, that's why you can't have all these characters' names so similar. Jeffrey and Georgine. Jeffrey and Georgine empty the dungeons that are full of brigands, and I don't know why the dungeons are full of brigands, because the king would probably have put most of them to death. But the dungeons are full of brigands for whatever reason, and Jeffrey and Georgine empty the dungeon and give them the flags of the 7 holds. Fari pointed out that, well, there's the fish, a sheep, a badger, 3 lions, and we know from Gerald's chapter when he was explaining to Gade, those are all flags of the 7 holds. So they put the prisoners out and gave them boats, knowing that they would become pirates, so that vessels from northern countries and traders would blame the 7 holds for the attacks, for the pirate attacks. And to what end? Honestly, I don't know. I don't know what the plan was there. But they just released a bunch of prisoners, hoping that they would become pirates. Kinda great. I think it's cool that we see that the Middle Kingdom has advanced industry. And Fari notes this when he crosses the bridge, that there's so much untamed forest east of the Middle Kingdom. So the Westerners are almost pioneer-like, going in and claiming, clearing these untamed forests across the bridge. I think that's cool that the plan is working, that the army goes in and they take out any skirmishers, secure the area, let the craftsmen build, and then station the city guard, the city watch there. So I think that's kind of cool. I'm pretty sure this is the last time we see either Fari or Jordan of what's left of this book. At this point, I was getting to the point where I couldn't decide what I was going to do next. I've mentioned that this entire book really is a cautionary tale against George R. R. Martin's gardener style. He calls himself a gardener. I've talked about this before. That George R. R. Martin talks about the 2 writing styles, the architect and the gardener, and he considers himself a gardener. That he sort of just plants seeds and sees where it's going to go. He has an idea, like, okay, this is what I would like the garden to look like, but if something pops up here and there, well, then let's go and do that. So at this time in the story, it was time to start trimming and pruning, and I started running into these problems a lot sooner than George did, admittedly. But right around this time, the story's getting out of control, growing too big, too many things are going on. Things were going to need to be brought in, because this is like 50,000 words into the story, so the swell had happened. Now we need to start tapering to the point of the story. So at this point, I'm like, I don't know, Jordan, maybe we'll have him fight Sir Jacob and die, and then Lord Michael, when he goes to the Middle Kingdom, he'll just be thrown in prison, and Jeffrey will just lose his mind. We've kind of shown that he's an emotional train wreck, so he'll just go crazy and go live in his room for the rest of the story. And then the story will just be about Gerald and the king and Ben and Brandon and Josh or something. I watched a video where a guy was complaining that in the Game of Thrones TV show, character deaths were used to end stories instead of start them like in the books or like in the first few seasons of Game of Thrones. Spoilers for the books and the show, but Ned Stark's death is the motivation point for everything that happens afterward. So it's a motivation for this war, this drama that goes on. Where in the show, to contrast, they just kill off Barristan Selmy and it's never spoken of, or something. But the thing is, that idea of every character death starting 3 more stories, that's not a sustainable pattern. That's not a sustainable thing to do. For every character that dies, you start 3 stories. That's you can't do that. You can't start 3 storylines for every character that dies, which is what George did. And now the books are so big and there's so many characters and there's so much going on that these books are never going to get finished. And this is really the problem with George's gardening style of writing. He never did any of the pruning. He didn't pull any weeds. He didn't pull the right weeds, at least. To tell you the truth, like, I struggled through Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons because everything that the first 3 books made me care about was gone. Tywin was gone. Robb was gone. The plot was wrapped up. Everything that was set up in the first book that Ned was trying to uncover, he's like trying to figure out this mystery. All that's basically wrapped up by the end of the 3rd book. So really all that's left that I'm interested in is what's going on with Jon Snow, and by the end of Dance with Dragons, you know what happens there. And honestly, it was just torture reading those Daenerys chapters in Dance with Dragons. If I cared about Daenerys at all, I don't now. If I ever did, I definitely don't now. So the whole plot, everything that we were introduced to care about, like in the first book, about with Ned, what's going on with Jon Arryn, Joffrey's parents, all this stuff that Ned cared about, that got us hooked into the story, all that's dealt with. All that's gone. So I got to the point, like, why am I reading this? How is what's going on in Braavos, what does that have to do with what's going on in the Dothraki Sea, and how does that connect to what Jon Connington is doing, and what does that have to do with Sam going to the Citadel, and Melisandre, and Cersei, and King's Landing? What is that, and what happened to Brienne? What's going on with that, and Jaime, and how does all this, what's the plot here? What's actually happening? I can't see anything that's going on. So all this stuff, I'm seeing all these branches, and I'm like, where does this go? How is this going to be brought together? Now, and then we're in the 4th book, we're getting introduced to Cthulhu Blackbeard, Euron Greyjoy, and young Griff. All this stuff seems to come out of nowhere. And honestly, that's what happened with this book that I wrote. It happened a lot sooner. This veers course. So everything that we're introduced to in the first half of the book spirals into absurdity, which is why I never finished this book. But there's like 5 to 6 more chapters left. Yeah, my rant over. But there's like 5 to 6 chapters left, so I'll show you that in the coming weeks. So come back, we'll see how this ends, because I never did finish this book, and you're kind of seeing why now. Nothing like the last few chapters, I'm kind of struggling to read them, honestly. Like, making these videos, it's kind of becoming a chore to read them. It's becoming a chore to read these chapters because they're really not that great. They're not that interesting. I'm not really gripped by any of this. I don't really care what happens next with this stuff. It kind of lost me. But next week, we get to go back and see Gerald. So we'll see what Gerald's up to. Gerald's a fan favorite. So I'll see you next week on the Storytime Saturday podcast. Thanks for being here. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. If you're watching anywhere else, make sure you like and all that. And I'll see you next week.